So as far as I understand, we are about to start and everyone is online and everyone is offline with us here. So my name is Sergiy Sydorenko. I'm an editor of European Pravda news outlet, and here I am not a journalist but a moderator. I have to warn those participating with us here that I pretend to be a tough moderator, so I would try to limit here and would try to make our conversation not a number of speeches, but rather a discussion. So please engage in our discussion. I mean, the audience, unfortunately, with the light, I cannot see hands when you would like to ask questions, but I hope that organizers would help to locate in a due time. So we have, I would say, an excellent panel for me if we are talking about Central Europe security and current challenges. Excellent because we have all possible players from Central Europe or from Europe in general are represented in one way or another. I would like to address all of you in different capacities. So we have Carmen Romero, who is NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy, and it means a big, let's say, guy, lady, but guy. So I mean the one who looks to all of us, and whom we all, including Ukraine, rely on when it comes to our hard security. We have Alena Kudzko, who is a good guy for Ukraine. I mean, because she represents Slovakia, GLOBSEC, and Slovakia is a country that provides us with air defense. Slovakia was the first country providing us with air defense systems, and it's important for us, but at the same time, Alena also represents an aggressor country, which is Belarus, because she's from Belarusian origin. So we will try to look from that perspective as well. Now, we have Velina Tchakarova, who is from Austria, which means for us that it's a neutral country which remains neutral despite all the challenges we have in Europe, and also she's from Bulgaria, which is like a swing country when it comes to providing defense assistance to Ukraine. We have András Rácz, which is, let's say, Hungarian agent here, despite he can not support Orban, but it doesn't matter for us now. And we have me, which is Ukraine, which will treat you in these bad ways. So let's start. And I would ask all of you to come with short introductory, let's say, speeches, and then, of course, I will ask you on topics that are, let's say, in your competence, and I would invite all of you to join us in the same way as I did. So, Carmen, please, how do you see NATO role in all of that?
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon from Brussels. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So, well, as you can imagine, the first thing that I would like to do is to thank all of you, the organizers of this second Ukrainian Central European Forum, for bringing us together for this very timely debate. And well, since you hosted the first edition of this important forum, our world has changed radically. And I'm sure you have already discussed this, but we face the most serious security situation in a generation. And this has been created by President Putin's aggression against Ukraine. So I will focus, as you were saying, my intervention on NATO's response to this illegal and to this unprovoked invasion. And I have to tell you that the response of our alliance has been swift, it has been strong, and also united. And our members from Central Europe have contributed fully to everything the alliance is doing since the beginning of this crisis. And since January, NATO allies have provided what I would say is unprecedented military, financial, and also humanitarian support to help Ukraine uphold its right to self-defense. And this, I think this is also important to highlight, this support builds on many years of close partnership between NATO and Kiev. Remember, including the training of thousands of Ukrainian forces since the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014. And now we can see how this investment is making a difference every day on the battlefield. This is something that our Secretary General says very often. I can also assure you from where I am at NATO headquarters that NATO allies are united. They are really united in their determination to continue to support Ukraine, not only now, but for as long as it takes. As you know, NATO's main responsibility is the collective defense of our 30, soon to be 32 allies. And this is why we have substantially increased our presence from the Baltic to the Black Sea, especially in Eastern and Central Europe, mainly in the Baltic countries, but also in countries from Central Europe, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania. And right now, we have over 40,000 troops under NATO command. This builds on the most significant increase of our collective defense that we have been implementing since 2014, so it's not something new. So when Russia invaded Ukraine again, we were shocked, but we were not surprised. In fact, we warned about the invasion for months. And this allowed us to implement our defense plans immediately. Also, it's important to highlight the fact that NATO is not a party to the conflict. We are a defensive alliance. So what our aim is mainly to preserve peace and to prevent this war from escalating into a full-blown conflict on our continent. This is really a priority. By strengthening our defense, at the same time, we are leaving no room for miscalculation in Moscow about our strong determination to defend every inch of Allied territory. We had recently a NATO Defense Ministerial meeting. It was a few weeks ago in Brussels, and we saw strong commitment. Our allies, our member states announced additional assistance to Ukraine, and NATO as such is going to deliver very shortly counter-drone equipment with hundreds of drone jammers to help protect Ukrainian people and also critical infrastructure. And this is just an example of the non-lethal support that the alliance is providing and has been providing since the beginning of the war. Now, it goes without saying that the invasion of Ukraine has destroyed peace in Europe. It is undermining the basic rules, the rules-based international order that we have built together at the end of the Cold War. And this is very serious. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine creates a completely new security reality on the European continent. So what are we doing in response? In response, the leaders of the alliance have agreed a fundamental shift in NATO's deterrence and defense. They did this at our last summit in Madrid in June. And in fact, this is the biggest overhaul of defense and deterrence since the end of the Cold War. We recognize that in order to defend our allies, we need to significantly step up our deterrence and defense measures. And we need to do this for the long term and in line with our 360-degree approach. And we need to do this across all domains and against all threats and challenges. So this is the reason why NATO is strengthening also forward defenses. This is very important. We have also doubled the number of NATO battle groups. We had 4, now 8 in the east and in the central part of the alliance. We are also working towards being able to enhance these battle groups quickly to a brigade level. At the Madrid summit, allies also agreed to develop a new NATO force model. And this new force model will give NATO a more proactive posture. It will reinforce our capacity to respond and also our readiness and our combat power. At the same time, our high readiness forces will boost the ability of NATO to reinforce fast. This is also relevant, to reinforce fast any threatened ally. And they will do this, of course, together with more preposition equipment, stockpiles of military supplies, and forward deployed capacities, like, for example, air defense and strengthened command and control. Then I would like to speak about two military concepts, because two NATO military concepts define the direction of this military adaptation. First, what we call the concept for deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. And second, what we call the NATO warfighting capstone concept. The first one is a guide on what we need to do to ensure deterrence and defense today. And the second is a vision for future warfare. The warfighting capstone concept is based on the belief that one cannot fight tomorrow's warfare with yesterday's thinking and tools. So investing in the right people, in the right equipment, in the right thinking is needed. So this concept charts the way forward to adapt the militaries of NATO to future challenges all the way to 2040. I was saying that Russia is the most significant and direct threat to our security, also in Central Europe, but it is not the only one. We cannot forget that. We need to prepare for growing strategic competition, because we also face the ongoing threat of terrorism, instability on our borders, disruptive technologies, climate change, and China's assertive policies. So this is why NATO leaders agreed a new strategic concept in June. They approved it to reflect our new security reality, and also to make sure that NATO continues to keep our 1 billion people safe in a more dangerous and also more unpredictable world. So the new strategic concept makes clear that NATO's biggest responsibility is collective defense. And that to do this, we will need to continue to strengthen three areas. First, our deterrence and defense at home. Second, our ability to prevent and to manage crises beyond our borders. And third, our cooperation with partners that share our values, that share our interests. Then at the last summit, allies also invited Finland and Sweden to join NATO. Why? Because they requested so, and because their membership will make them safer, but will also make our alliance stronger. And we agreed concrete steps to tackle the full spectrum of threats and challenges that we face today and tomorrow. So, including climate change, new technologies. So to conclude from my side, yes, our world has changed radically, and NATO is changing too, which is important. It goes without saying we will continue to adapt to a rapidly changing world, to protect our people, to protect our values that are also at risk. And here we need Central Europe to continue to work in close cooperation. The countries of Central Europe inside NATO make our alliance stronger. They care and they contribute to our shared security every day. That's what I can tell you from here as an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Just to check, let's say, my powers. Let's check. Do you see me? No, you don't. Okay, just,
I don't see you.
Okay, because that's very good that you've represented such a let's say, comprehensive picture. But for later, I have to know the way. How can I interrupt those who are speaking? And for those who are offline, it's easier. For those online, I will scream. But anyway, that is very good that you've presented such a comprehensive approach. Let's talk about that and let's reflect that. Alena, I would ask you in capacity of a good guy. So we've seen that not only Slovakia, but also other countries of Central Europe were quite brave in providing Ukraine with defense assistance during this war. How much do you see that Central European countries can act independently, even if their actions are in security sphere are going further than actions of other players in this field?
Thank you so much for the question, and of course, thank you very much to the organizers for making sure that this conference is possible. I was amazed at the idea, and I think we're all happy to be here despite all the circumstances. I'm also glad that I get to speak after the introduction provided by Deputy Assistant Secretary General, because I don't have to explain much all the great things that are done by the Alliance. So my task is much easier. I can just explain why we think that much more can be done, and the reason for that is quite simple. Ukraine hasn't quite won yet, and from the Central European perspective, that's absolutely imperative also for our security. So you mentioned that Central Europeans have been quite brave in providing certain type of assistance to Ukraine, even ahead of other countries, be it in Europe or even overseas. Why is that? I think the reason is quite simple. The majority of people and countries in Central Europe understand that Ukraine's security is actually our own security, and we literally have skin in the game. So it's quite understandable that we do want to go much further than others, and we understand much better and from very close experience why it is important and why we have to do it now. Again, a standard caveat, I'm talking about the decisive mainstream in Central Europe. We have other people to talk a little bit about outliers and the ones who disagree. But in doing so, that comes the second part of your question, whether Central Europeans by ourselves can provide what is needed and then can continue on this trajectory. We can continue, but I don't think Central European effort alone is enough to ensure security in Europe and to ensure decisive victory in Ukraine. That's why going forward for Central Europeans, it's absolutely crucial to convey the message and make sure the buy-in of both our Western European partners, but also continuously of Americans. In terms of Western European partners, a lot of paradigmical shifts have already happened also in the thinking of Western countries. Even if you take countries like Germany or France, a lot of fantastic things have been done also at the European level. For example, the European peace facilities or rather packages of assistance that have provided. But we have to be also honest. Without the assistance that was provided by the United States or United Kingdom, and I'm talking here about the hard military assistance and capabilities, it is very likely that Ukraine would have had lost the war by now. So it's absolutely important for us to make sure that this assistance is continued, but also to make sure that Europeans are stepping up and providing much more. That's why this ability to make a more and more convincing case and make sure that the unity about which Mrs. Romero has been talking about actually is sustainable in the future. But it's also important for Central Europeans to double down on the effort to reach out to Americans. We all know that there is important elections going on actually tomorrow in the United States, and for Europeans will be not any easier to make the case that Americans have to be as engaged as they have been before, and we do need to make sure that also our contributions are higher to demonstrate also to the American public that Europeans are doing their part of the game. There are several ways what from the Central European perspective have worked in providing assistance to Ukraine, and the key at this moment is to make sure how the good things and the good parts of the cooperation that made the difference on the ground can be put in a more sustainable perspective in the future, because there is also a realization that we're all in it for a long game, even if there is a rather quick enough victory of Ukraine, that the need to provide security in the region will also have to be maintained for the longer period of time. The first probably important lessons that even countries in Central Europe are learning right now is that Ukraine needs much stronger security guarantees that it had in the future, in the past. And of course, the strongest security guarantee that can be done is to continue making sure that Ukraine has the capacity to defend itself, which means also that the security assistant has to stay and has to be reformed. And by reform, I mean actually the second lesson that Europeans, but also the entire Western Alliance has learned, is that in the past a lot of things were done, but all these things were done in a bit more of a reactive message, in a reactive manner. So when we learned and analyzed situation on the ground, then we draw conclusions what type of assistance is needed, what type of equipment or weapons is needed, then we start negotiating who has it, who is going to provide it, how to overcome political differences at home. So it all causes the delays, and unfortunately both Ukraine loses time, but also the situation becomes much harder to control. So one important lesson that will need to be addressed in the future is to how make this security provision more planned and more predictable in the future, so that when time comes we're ready and have the domestic homework done already on the ground. If we're talking about specifically cooperation with Central Europe and Ukraine, and probably that's just one point that I want to mention here, is we'll already start noticing that it's not so easy to always provide the necessary equipment and weapons, also because the production capacities on the western side are at the limits. So looking into the future is probably the right time right now to start planning for Central Europeans and for Ukrainians collectively how to develop the industrial production capacities that would be also helping Ukraine to sustain the defense forces in the future, but also will help to provide certain equipment and weapons for the current NATO allies, and how to make sure that we have a common supply chains and also military industrial capacities shared between Central Europe and Ukraine. And I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that in the universities where moderators are taught, it is said that I have to reflect the previous speaker coming to the next. And I've noticed a very important phrase that you say, that we have seen many historical shifts in Western European countries. And I would fully agree, noting particularly German shift. And I would say even two shifts. The first was Zeitenwende in the very beginning of the war, and now I see further shift in speech by Steinmeier, in change of attitude of politicians. And my question to a neutral country, which is represented here, I mean to Velina, who certainly doesn't speak for government, but can speak for society. Can we expect that kind of shift in those countries that are still neutral? Can we expect that neutral countries would, I mean in Central Europe, would cease to be neutral? Well, why do I say countries? It is only one, I would say.
I hate that question, but since I'm your guest, I have to be polite enough to answer it. First, I'm not a sociologist, so I actually do not deal with society and perceptions, attitudes, so on and so forth. But I will do my best to give you an adequate answer to this. And that is that, as you rightfully pointed out, obviously the push for a change came from society. This was the case with Finland and Sweden, where practically the stakeholders, political stakeholders, were not expecting this kind of really strong support in favor of NATO membership. And they were more or less, at least in my conversations with representatives from these two countries, were really kind of shocked positively that this could be proceeded so quickly, so swiftly. Now, given this example of Sweden and Finland, I can also give you the counterexample, and that is welcome to Austria. If there is one concept, one narrative that hasn't witnessed any shift, on the contrary, that is the narrative on the perpetual neutrality. It's a kind of a, if you like, almost a cognitive dissonance. And I speak as an expert who also joined a group of other experts in Austria in signing an open letter immediately after Sweden and Finland applied for membership, as we were pursuing a public debate on what it means for Austria and its neutrality following the membership of Sweden and Finland in NATO. And even that was not possible in our society, as the government was in an absolute kind of let's say, pushback approach or attitude, trying to not open a Pandora box, and also due to the fact that we were having a presidential election campaign, which then took place in September. So it was an impossible situation for those in the Austrian society who represent institutes, think tanks, experts, to even steer any meaningful debate. So to sum it up for you, we had zero debate on the meaning of neutrality following the membership of Sweden and Finland. And let me remind you that Austria was part of the neutrals bloc in 1995 when we joined the European Union. We joined the European Union together as the three neutrals, and with the one being neutral for the last 200 years, and the other one being neutral since the end of, of the Second World War. Sorry, this should have been actually the most natural question for the Austrian politics and the Austrian society to deal with. But no, this did not happen. The same goes for the open letter that hasn't been answered. The same goes for any meaningful security debate. Now, if we move the discussion to the next level, we should also be mindful of the fact that Austria isn't neutral in political terms. Austria did its contribution within the family of the European Union. Austria constructively abstained for the European Peace Facility to function and to work, and it contributed to it. So actually, what is really funny is that the Austrian society doesn't even know that in an indirect way, Austria has been contributing even with military aid. Now, let me explain very shortly for you what Austrian neutrality means. Per 2022, it's still more or less about the military component. That means that Austria is not allowed to join military and defense alliances, is not allowed to host military bases by external forces, and is practically also not allowed to contribute with military aid to any other country. But as I said, due to its participation in the peace facility, it is practically also contributing. The same goes for the participation in the common foreign and security, respectively security and defense policy. The same goes for now also the aim to build up the defense with 17 not 100, but still, I mean, the scale is very different, 17 billion euros, which is, by the way, a commitment that all member states, in fact, took as part of the common security and defense policy. Something that also happened under the radar of the society. So I argue that Austrians like to see themselves as the, island of the blessed, and given the new geopolitical realities on the old continent, we may turn into literally this island next to the three other neutral islands, Ireland, Malta, Cyprus, which all have military access. We don't even have a military access, and have a kind of a protection from, external powers, which we don't have. We are surrounded by NATO, mostly by NATO members, and have to more or less build up militarily and in defense matters. So I argue that this concept of neutrality is overhauled, as in the mindset of Austrians. It does not reflect the reality, the geopolitical reality of the 21st century. And we can discuss this later, of course, what it really means. Yeah,
thank you. I really like the discussion, because after every address I have a number of questions, but I have to restrain myself to give a floor for everyone. And the last but not least, András Rácz. András, are you here? Because we don't see you, but I hope we will see later. And so a bad guy. Representing Hungarian society. As Velina said, society is important. In Hungary, unfortunately, we see a big part of the society which still thinks that Russia is not that much guilty of the war, which is against of any kind of assistance provided by Hungary to Ukraine and so on. How do you see? Is it a genuine position? What can we do with Hungary, which we see now?
So, first and foremost, thank you for the invitation and apologies for not being there personally. In fact, I got the invitation quite late, so it was already impossible to organize the travel. So thank you for the possibility of joining, at least online. Kind of a disclaimer, I am not representing Hungary, as bad as it sounds, but I don't. It's not exactly a coincidence that I've been working in Germany already for 3 years. So I'm working in Germany at the German Council on Foreign Relations, and I'm not representing and not properly tasked to explain Hungarian foreign policy towards Ukraine. Anyways, I can try, of course. And thank you, Sergiy, for making it so easy to start, so introducing me as the public enemy. This is the place where it's very easy to win, right? But still, let me try. But first, whatever I say here constitutes solely and exclusively my own personal opinion. So it shall not be taken as any kind of an official position of a state or an organization. This is something I have to say all the time. So, in order to answer your question about first the Hungarian society, one needs to see that the Hungarian society, based on all the public opinion data we have, is actually quite divided on the conflict in Ukraine. So one needs to differentiate between the society and actually the government policies, particularly because since the present government has been possessing constitutional supermajority almost for 12 years, and this constitutional supermajority has been strengthened and reconfirmed in the spring elections, 3rd of April this year. If one has a constitutional supermajority, in the Hungarian legal system, you can do practically anything, whatever you please. And even if the society is divided, once the government has a constitutional supermajority, there are very few ways how the society can actually influence the government policies. Particularly because this government, or you may call it this regime, has been in power again for more than a decade. Dear colleagues, more than 10 years. It's really a lot of time. And if one reads the Freedom House reports, if one reads all the background material regarding the rule of law procedure against Hungary, most of the independent checks and balances have already been either weakened or neutralized. To put the thing simple, there is barely any societal or civil control over what the government is doing vis-a-vis Ukraine. So the society's opinion does not really have the potential to change the policy. The society's opinion can be of any help in the through the non-governmental channels. What does it mean primarily? Solidarity with Ukrainian refugees and asylum seekers. In the beginning of the war, this was important. Let me remind you of the numbers. By now, more than 1.5 million Ukrainian citizens sought refuge in Hungary or transited Hungarian territory since the war has begun. And in the beginning, the government was barely able to do anything for the refugees. In the first 4 or 5 weeks, most of the refugees were helped by civil society activists. Hundreds of thousands of Hungarians were involved, not the government, but the civil society. And people who were not even organized as civil society, just individual ordinary volunteers. So here I just like to warn against generalization. Namely, one shall not mix up the society and the government. So when it comes to the government's policies, I think the most I can try to contribute with is to explain not what is happening, because the what you know already, but to try to explain why all these things are happening. And the short answer to this why question, if you would like to say a one-word answer, literally one word, this one word, no, it's not corruption, don't laugh. This one word is inertia. Inertia in energy security. Because in the last 12 years, the Hungarian government completely failed to decrease her dependency on Russian energy supplies, particularly natural gas, and to a smaller extent also oil. Besides completely failing to diversify, the Hungarian government also worked about strengthening this dependence by contracting Rosatom for building 2 new nuclear power plant blocks in Hungary. And why this diversification has not taken place, it's a complicated story. There have been political motives, plenty of financial motives. But dear colleagues, as of now, 7th of November, 2022, it just does not matter why certain things did not happen 5 or 6 years ago. Given the situation, I mean, one needs to focus on the situation that Hungary is right now. And this situation is that Hungary is critically dependent on the continued flow of Russian natural gas, period. If Gazprom stops supplying, that would cause a major disruption of even the very elementary public services in Hungary. Major disruption. In the short run, 1-2 years, Hungary has simply no gas supply alternative, because Budapest has failed to work on the diversification for more than a decade. And this is a unique level of dependence. Unique level of dependence because non-Russian import channels are critically narrow, are just too narrow. Energy security experts call it a bottleneck. So right now there is a situation that Hungary must avoid Russia cutting the gas supplies. And one more thing, which makes the dependence even more critical. This is not only supply security, it's also finances. I mean, the money. Due to the elections that have taken place on 3rd of April this year in Hungary, before the elections, the Hungarian government basically emptied the budget to a significant extent. You know, pre-election gifts, all that. So when the crisis kicked in due to the increased gas prices, the Hungarian budget was already extremely strained and weakened. So the energy crisis hit Hungary in a financially already vulnerable period. And right now there is such a situation that if Hungary had to pay the market price for the gas that Gazprom is asking, the Hungarian budget would be getting close to getting bankrupted. The situation is so serious that the Hungarian government basically had to take a credit line from the Gazprom. Technically, it's not a credit line. Technically, it's called delayed payment. So if the price goes over a certain level, Hungary doesn't have to pay immediately, but has 3 more years for paying this. This is de facto a credit line. Comes the question, why did Gazprom give this credit line? The answer is easy. One needs to understand Russian strategy a bit. The Hungarian budget is so vulnerable that had Gazprom not given the credit line, the only option Budapest would have had was to go to the IMF for the money. Meaning dependence on Gazprom, dependence on Russia would have decreased. And this is not something that Moscow wants. Moscow wants the opposite. So that's why Gazprom guaranteed this delayed payment for the gas price to further increase Hungary's dependence and vulnerability.
Yeah,
because most of the details of the energy deals are classified or actually state secret, one cannot really give you the exact numbers. But just please remember one thing, there is such a critical dependence right now on the Hungarian side that in the short run, it's, let's put it in a polite way, highly unlikely that the Hungarian position vis-a-vis Ukraine would change significantly. Budapest hands are just tied. There is, in the short run, there is no freedom of movement.
Thank you, András. Thank you indeed for that perspective, which also shows for us that security is not only about hard security. It also means that security is also about energy, food security for other countries, and so on. That is what Carmen said in the very beginning, that we have to think not only about Russia, and that is true. Global security is much more complex. So we have a good ground for the discussion. I already see your hands up, but misusing my role as a moderator, I will start with asking Carmen with a question which I am really interested about. I have plenty of questions, of course. I think that either anyone in the audience or me later will ask about new security concept, which is important, but a short but important one. Well, NATO is a structure which is associated in Ukraine with hard security, with a brave organization. At the same time, now we have two embassies that did not dare to return to Kyiv. One is Serbia, another is NATO. Well, I don't count Russia and Belarus. Sorry. So why NATO is so unbrave?
Well, thank you, Sergey, for your question. I have to tell you that our offices in Ukraine actually never closed because they continue to operate remotely. So we have two offices in Ukraine. One is dealing with policy, defense capacity building, and our head director has been working from abroad. And then we have the NATO Information and Documentation Office, which is led by a colleague in my team, Vineta Kleini, and she has been basically, he has been running the work of the office with colleagues inside Ukraine and other colleagues outside of Ukraine. So actually, we never left in a way because our operations have continued. Physically, it's true. The two heads are not physically in Ukraine right now because of security reasons, but our activities continue at the same level. So that's my message to you. As you know, NATO can only be present physically in a country where security of our employees is granted, and it has been mainly a security-related issue. But the important thing is that our mandate continues to be implemented.
Yeah, I hope that one day you will say that you are so brave that our heads can return, because this is also important as a message for us. So that's my misuse of moderator's role. So I see here, Maxim. I don't know whether mics are here in the audience. Who can? Yeah. So let's say rotate. One question from the audience and one from me.
I hope it's working. Maxim Yakovlev, School for Policy Analysis and Department of International Relations, Kyiv Mohil Academy. Thank you for interesting discussion. I would like to ask a question to Velina, and maybe the other panelists will also join answering, because you said that in Austria, the concept of neutrality hasn't changed or hasn't been debated. The government doesn't want to open discussions about neutrality. But my question is regarding to other concepts, because I do understand that neutralität can be immerwährend as a definition, like everlasting neutrality. But what about threat perceptions from Austria? I do understand that Switzerland and Liechtenstein is not going to invade you, and Russia needs to cross two borders to invade Austria. But apart from physical invasion, what are the fears, and how working about these fears can change the second thing, which is also in the name of our panel, sustainable cooperation and Austrian perception of Central Europe. Because once Austria used to be a Großmacht, a big power, and now big power with no discussion about neutrality now, with how these perceptions, if they ever change from Austrian perspective in Central Europe, and to other panelists, if you see the changes in threats perception, which is also very important. Thank you.
Yeah, no, one by one, that's better.
Yeah. Okay, one by one. Let's do it very quick. Let's do a very quick round. Yes, of course, first and foremost, as you know, all member states had to do this threat analysis conducted by the intelligence services or let's say in preparation for the strategic compass. Well, institutes, think tanks haven't got an access to it, so we don't know. I mean, in no in none of the member states. So we don't have an access to this threat analysis. As far as we understand, now following the adoption of the strategic compass in March this year, there will be also conversation and debate between the member states regarding future challenges and risks. So risks analysis will be the next, which is, I think, important process. And of course, now the simple answer to your question would be that Austria doesn't feel being threatened militarily by Russia, which explains also Austrian stance. Austria is very much, I mean, that's not a secret. It's one of the friendliest countries among the member states when it comes to Russia. Russian business, Russian penetration of public sector, of business, of private sector, so on and so forth. I mean, we have also former chancellors and ministers sitting in all these boards, similarly to Germany, and that has a lot to do with, without justifying it, has a lot to do with the fact that Austria is pretty much looking up to Germany when it comes to its foreign and security policy. So because of that, there is also this kind of ambiguous, in my personal view, very ambiguous stance, which is also reflected in the society, where there is an expectation that we need to steer peace talks. And still, even though that large share of the population, in fact, supports the sanctions, so Austria, as I said, has done its homework. It has sided with all the rest of the member states family when it comes to sanctions policy, when it comes to the common security and defense policy, contribution also to the peace facility. All of it is a fact. Share of Austrian troops within the European missions and operations, more than 800. So, I mean, it's over proportional participation also in the European missions and operations by Austrian armed forces. And yes, when it comes to the challenges, there is a lot of non-military nature challenges, such as blackouts, such as climate change related issues, disinformation, cyber. We also had cyber attacks. So all of this kind of comprehensive understanding, but I cannot give you a clear picture as of today where we're going to stand, given the fact that the process is ongoing right now.
Yeah, thank you. Pretending to be a good moderator have to feel the audience before he is beaten. So I see that not everyone was satisfied that I took too much time. So I give my, let's say.
Good afternoon, Stanislav Zhelichovsky, the Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine. Thank you for your very interesting presentation. During a meeting in Kiev, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Prime Minister of the Czech Republic signed the joint declaration of Ukraine on Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic perspective. Would it be appropriate to sign similar documents with all countries of the region and in the future with other member states of the alliance? Thank you.
Whom do you ask?
Maybe for all panelists.
So let's go one by one as it was in our presentation. So Carmen, please.
Okay, well, thank you. So obviously I cannot speak for what our member states can sign on a bilateral basis. As you know, we have the NATO Ukraine Commission, which means that we have a very, very, very advanced partnership, and we work on that basis. And that partnership has been reinforced since February, as I was saying. And what is also important is that at the Madrid summit, we did two things. We approved a renewed comprehensive assistance plan, and we also made very clear in the new strategic concept that to have an independent and sovereign Ukraine, it's a priority for the alliance, and it's also key for the Euro-Atlantic security. And on that basis, we are working on short-term measures, providing mainly non-lethal assistance to Ukraine, but also on medium-term and long-term measures to support Ukraine. And one of the things that I think it was Alena was saying at the beginning is that it's very, very important to work towards making Ukraine self-sustained in terms of having future strong security institutions to make sure that Ukraine can be a free country. And this is what NATO will be doing in terms of support. In the medium term, we will be working on helping Ukraine reconstruct the country, and then more long term, we will be also supporting Ukraine to transition from a Soviet weapons nation to a nation that owns and operates modern military equipment based on NATO standards. So a lot of work to do with Ukraine based on the long-standing partnership that we have had for a long time. And since I have the floor, I wanted to react on a few things that Alena said. I fully agree with Alena on the fact that Ukraine's security is our own security. That's something that is also valid for us as an organization, and this is key, and this is also something that we recognize in the new strategic concept. And then also what Alena said about making sure that the unity that I was talking about since the beginning of this invasion, to be able to sustain this for a long term. This is going to be one of the biggest challenges, and we will have to work all together with our nations, but also the civil society. This is a very important conference with experts of the civil society from many nations are gathering together, and whatever we can do to make clear to our different societies that we need to sustain this support. And this is very important in countries that are far away from Russia. So my home country, for example, I'm speaking about Spain, France, Italy, Greece, countries where we will need to keep the support to continue to support and to assist Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you. So let's go. If someone would like to miss or
I can just very quickly, because my answer is going to be very straightforward. Yes, the more you can sign, the better, because the more allies you can get, the merrier. I cannot commit the government of Slovakia because I don't represent the government of Slovakia, but I think the feeling is there. Probably, and B9 countries very quickly said that they are interested in having Ukraine as the member of NATO. So you do have the political support there. One practical point, I think these agreements are not inconsequential also from the point of view that governments change. And in some countries of Central Europe, there is no guarantee that the change of the government necessarily means continuation of the political direction. So in some ways, these agreements also help to make sure that at least there is some additional pressure on any potential next government that might come.
Velina, would you like it? You can skip it. It's up to you.
I mean, first and foremost, Austria is non-NATO member. So in a sense, we are now happy that we are back in the Partnership for Peace, where Austrian armed forces can train together with other NATO members because of our very troubled relationship with Turkey. So in a sense, this is already a great achievement for us. And in a sense, as I said, I mean, this is a kind of a barrier that we are imposing on ourselves by, like I said, not engaging in any meaningful debate about the future of how we want to interpret the everlasting, as you heard, neutrality, which I argue is just a matter of time to be practically overhauled by reality, because we are already in this reality. And I really want to talk in the next round a little bit about the common challenges facing Central and Eastern European countries.
I will do my best to ask you all that. András, I see you raised your hand. Please go forward.
Yes, thank you. Just very shortly. Of course, the more agreements Ukraine can have, the better it is. But in addition to agreements, one also needs capabilities. Because particularly in a wartime situation, capabilities matter a lot more than agreements do. And anyways, Ukraine had a number of security guarantees even from Russia. You all remember. and it didn't, and that agreement didn't help much either. So my view on that yes, the more agreements, the better. But at the same time, I see that the most powerful and most important security guarantee Ukraine can have is the power of Ukraine's own armed forces. The power, the weapons, the experience, and the willingness to fight. And I see NATO countries' core responsibility and also chance for contributing to this type of security guarantees. Because when it comes to anything more institutionalized security guarantee, I could name more than one NATO member country which would not be happy to sign such a collective agreement from the side of the alliance. So instead of looking for any kind of real security guarantee, let alone defense guarantee from any collective body from the West, I think it's much more important to focus on the individual capabilities development. And I fully agree with what Alena said, that military assistance and all other forms of assistance need to be continued, and the existing caveats and bottlenecks in industrial capabilities need to be addressed as quick as possible. And yes, of course, in addition to all this, the more agreements, the better it is. But what we need to focus on, in my opinion, is the capabilities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So now it's my turn, finally. As I said, I pretend to be not only good, but also tough moderator. And that means that a part of my silly jokes, I would have to ask questions that you'd not expect. Carmen, so let's focus on NATO strategic concept in a way which is not discussed, unfortunately, in Europe. Let's try to do that. Do you see that the NATO strategic concept, which was just adopted this year in Madrid, is it modern enough to function if and when Russia collapses, and probably when Russia dissolutes in several states? Because this scenario cannot be excluded. Do you see that NATO would have to review fully its strategic concept, or it would leave with an obsolete one, as NATO did for previous years?
So you are assuming, Sergei, that Russia is going to collapse? That's your question?
I think that it is one of scenarios, and I certainly do assume that Russia will lose and Ukraine will win.
Yeah. So basically, when we look at the 70 years, over 73 years now of NATO's history, what we have seen is that NATO has always been able to adapt. As the world has changed, NATO has changed to face the new security challenges as they have emerged. So what I can tell you is that if there is a big change in the security environment or, scene in Europe, of course, NATO will adjust to that. But in the meantime, we have to focus on what we have now, which is Russia has become the biggest direct threat to the security of our member states, and we need to continue to invest on two things: on reinforcing our collective defense, our deterrence and defense, and then at the same time to continue to galvanize and sustain that support for Ukraine. So this is the priority right now. Of course, we always look at possible scenarios. And what I can assure you is that if there is a huge security change, NATO will continue to adapt, because we have shown that we have done this over 73 years. But right now, we should keep the focus, and it's going to be a very tough winter. It's going to be a very tough winter for Ukrainians. It's going to be a very tough winter for our economies, because we spoke about security is not only about basically hard security, it's also about energy, it's about food security. So therefore, now, in my view, our focus should be on delivering on the many challenges that we have right now.
Yeah, thank you. So NATO is going to adapt and prove that it is able to adapt, but now we have to focus on other scenarios. Let's talk on that. So I would ask every other panelist to reflect on my question and on what Carmen, as a representative of NATO, said. So how do you see, is there some kind of readiness in the EU, in the NATO, in the EU as well, when it also comes to Austria, to react to a rapidly changing situation, or we should raise a focus on current threats that we have, like energy, which is really relevant, food security, and so on. Alena.
I had a feeling after February that we were surprised ourselves how ready the European Union and NATO are to react to the changing situation. Before February, I don't think anybody, neither Putin nor ourselves, could believe that we could do what we did. So for me, this is the biggest indicator that we're actually pretty good at it, maybe even better than reacting to the current challenges. But of course, I'm exaggerating because there is a serious work that is being done to address the energy crisis and other challenges that we're facing now. It's inevitable, but thinking about the future, all scenarios are important, but if you're a politician, your job is to prepare for the most probable ones. And I think this is what is currently going on.
And do you see that anyone is at least considering options like collapse of Russia?
I've heard it in many discussions, but at least my reading is that among the possible options, this is the less likely one. That's why the emphasis is not on it.
Velina, what is your position or your, let's say, assessment on it?
Okay, let's start first and foremost with the scenarios. Now, given the fact that I've been also conducting strategic foresight and scenarios, and I had my scenario for the war already in December, with the right timing and everything except for the scope, which nobody got right except for some military experts. I think that I was I was doing pretty well on that matter. So my main scenario for now is actually that we are still, in fact, in the situation that Ukraine is winning, obviously, the war, and the Russian economy and system is witnessing the situation of implosion, respectively, collapse or political vacuum or change in the government. It can have different variations. And we should be really getting ready for that. But as also Carmen pointed out and the other colleagues, we are also sliding a little bit towards the other scenario of war of attrition, which is basically what Russia is doing right now, playing for time. Let me remind you that on 24th of February, Russia did not only launch a war against Ukraine, but also against the European security order, and it launched a non-kinetic war by non-military means involving information warfare, geoeconomic warfare, including blockade of critical commodities such as energy, fertilizers, food, and so on and so forth. And that war is continuing. So that means Russia is playing now for time and hoping that at least one significant government in Europe is going to collapse. Significant government, I mean, of course, of a country with a significant role within the European Union members' families, so that it could steer towards this kind of ceasefire narrative. Right now, this is the war of attrition scenario that we want to avoid. And of course, what we also want to avoid is the third scenario, and that would be a frozen conflict. We should prevent by all means, and that means including society, governments, members, and institutions, a scenario that we freeze this war so that Russia has the time to replenish forces and mobilize further cannon fodder to send to the front lines, and then, you know, start again next year. We should prevent that from happening, because this is, of course, a scenario that will also create a lot of political, turbulences in Europe, given the next critical months. I would like to point to something else, which I am a little bit surprised. There is still, after so many months of war, no real sense of urgency in some European capitals. Yes, of course, unprecedented coherent approach by Europe, by the European Union, and also by NATO. But at the very same time, lack of sense of urgency that this war is also a war being waged against the security order on the old continent. And what I also miss, even though that we have not one but two strategic documents, the strategic compass by the European Union and the strategic document by NATO, where we have not only Russia, but also China, which are being treated like two separate challenges in the one case and threat in the other case. And none of the members have started dealing with threat multiplier by China and Russia together, because Central and Eastern European countries are going to be this terrain that is going to be penetrated by what I've coined as a dragon bear. And what do I mean by that? I argue that Putin also launched this war, or let me rephrase it. Putin would have never launched a full-scale war against Ukraine on 24th of February if he had not relied on the comprehensive long-term support by China. And second, he also launched a full-scale war because he wanted to trigger a systemic competition between the United States and China. Russia is no longer the systemic player. However, Russia sought a pole position. That means becoming a first-tier country immediately after China and United States, a kind of indispensable game changer between two competing systemic rivals. And by subjugating Ukraine, by destroying the European security order, by seizing a large terrain and becoming this, even if you like a junior partner of China on the old continent, he would have rewritten the rules of the game. And that means completely, if he had been successful in that matter. And I haven't heard anything about that in any kind of forums, or which, as I said, this kind of lack of sense of urgency that we are in a Cold War 2.0 scenario, but we don't want to admit it, which is why our competitors are already applying all these active measures and all of these kind of classic means of, of warfare, non-kinetic warfare on us. Whereas we are not preparing our societies, we are still dealing as if this is only Ukraine's problem and we should, help Ukraine deal with this problem. I cannot agree with it. And in fact, I argue that if we slide into the scenario 2, war of attrition, and God beware in the scenario 3, a frozen conflict, then we will wake up to a reality. We will get such a punch in the face by the reality that our governments, it is those who will be still standing, because there will be political consequences, that this will be, of course, a worst case scenario for all of us, meaning European Union and NATO.
Thank you, Velina. Very interesting thoughts. András, could you please reflect on this, given that you know well those governments that are reluctant to act? Do you see that there is a chance for Central European governments to face the challenges and the realities that can take place after Ukraine wins? Hopefully, I hope that we will be sooner than later.
Thank you, Sergey. Good news. And here I'm going to promote Alena's institution. Dear colleagues, please check the newest edition of the GLOBSEC Trends survey. As you know it very well, GLOBSEC has been publishing every year a survey on the political and security policy orientations of the wider Central Europe, covering 7, 8, 9 countries, depending on the year. The recent GLOBSEC Trends has been published in May this year, so already after the start of the war. And it firmly shows that every Central European society, of course with some variables, but every Central European society is aware of the threat, and the perceptions are changing. Yes, even in Hungary. Yes, even in Bulgaria. So please, instead of just trying to base analysis on perceptions and thoughts, please go for the data. And the data provided by the GLOBSEC Trend survey is actually quite reassuring. And second thing to the question whether Russia would collapse. Here I'm going to be the one who brings the bad news. Dear colleagues, I don't really see what would cause the Russian regime to collapse. The reason why I do not see it, that most of the repressive apparatus is intact and even getting stronger. Yes, Rosgvardia lost, so Russian National Guard lost a few thousand soldiers in Ukraine. But the size of Rosgvardia is more than 400,000. FSB is still intact. FSO is still intact. I mean, the whole domestic Russian repressive apparatus is intact, first. Second, ever since the beginning of the war, Putin considerably strengthened repressions. So right now, the Russian society or the Russian regime is a lot more autocratic than it was 9 months ago. And third, Russia's opposition has been practically destroyed, either disorganized or imprisoned or in emigration. What on earth would cause the Russian regime to collapse? I mean, the biggest possible source of instability that one shall realistically calculate with is if something happens to Vladimir Vladimirovich. But we know exactly what would have happened in that case. In case of a non-managed transition, what happens? You have a temporary president who's the prime minister, Mishustin, and you have in 3 months early elections. This is the biggest realistically possible source of instability in the short run. And if nothing extraordinary happens to the president, then we are going to have presidential elections in spring 2024. Where is the collapse? I mean, losing a war doesn't necessarily mean that Russia collapses. I mean, I'm afraid that this is kind of a wishful thinking in the sides of many. I think the real question is not how do we deal with the collapsing Russia, because the probability of the collapsing Russia is actually quite low. Even if the Russian elite decides that it's better to have a new president, it's not a collapse, dear colleagues. It's a reshuffling, but not a collapse. So I think instead of speculating on a collapse, the real question in the long run, I think, is that what kind of relations we are going to have with Russia after Ukraine wins. What kind of relations Ukraine will have with Russia after Ukraine wins the war. Because we are going to be neighbors with Russia. Ukraine is going to be neighbors with Russia. So I think instead of speculating on a hypothetical and of quite low probability Russian collapse, this is the real question we should think about. Yes, Ukraine will hopefully win, hopefully quite soon, but thereafter the geography won't change. We need to think seriously about what kind of relations we are going to have with a post-war and hopefully post-Putin Russia. This is the real question I see. And about the collapse, I'm quite skeptical. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So it's important to have different perspectives, and every of us experts have a right to have our own, let's say, view on that. If I did not mistake, Carmen gave some signals that, did you want to reflect to something or?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was a reaction to, thank you for giving me the floor. I think it was a reaction to what Alena was saying about the lack of a sense of urgency. And I have to say that I disagree with that, especially both what the European Union is doing and NATO in terms of increasing resilience in our societies. I think this has been really, there has been really a game change in the sense that we are using Article 3 of the Washington Treaty to increase resilience across the board, and also in terms of being more independent when we speak about energy. So I disagree that there is a sense of urgency. I agree that we need to maintain a sense of urgency, and we have to be very careful with that. But the work that is being done on increasing resilience across the board is been impressive. Both, I don't work for the European Union, but we can see that, and we also work very closely with them in different, areas. But at least in NATO, in terms of diversifying the different energy supplies, both in to help us become more independent from Russia, but also from China, is something that I have not seen in the past. So there is a sense of urgency.
Yeah, thank you. So before giving our floor to the audience again, I would ask organizers to make a picture with both András and Carmen on the screens that I would be able to see if you ask for reaction. And let's try a reverse order if there would be a question to everyone. So, Gena, please.
Thank you so much. Quite vibrant discussion. I would like to refer to the issue which is also very important in terms of security, which is strategic autonomy. when you look into European documents, like the Council decision of December 2022, you'll see that strategic autonomy of European Union is described as one of the pillars of security in the region. And it's based on the strategic compass, which already was mentioned by Velina. So my question is to Velina, Alena, and András on this issue. Do you think this concept is somehow reflected in thinking of your respective countries? I mean, in Slovakia, in Austria, or in Hungary? Or is this concept on rise, or maybe it is declining, and maybe there is no attitude at all to this issue in your countries? Thank you.
So let's go in reverse order. András, please.
Thank you. Again, I'm not representing Hungary. I can say it as many times as you want. I still won't represent it, just for the mark. Based on my limited knowledge on Hungarian security and defense policy thinking, the strategic autonomy has not been considered as a serious variable or as a future direction of how European security and defense shall develop, simply because of capability reasons. So my forecast is that in Hungary's security and defense policy, NATO and cooperation with the United States and transatlantic allies in matters of security and defense will keep playing a dominant, very, very important role. I hope this helps. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Velina?
I also don't speak in the name of my government. I am a geopolitical and security expert trying to, of course, understand some of the motives and intentions and also policy goals, and also influence them whenever possible. I just want to make a very short remark regarding Carmen's and András' remarks on the sense of urgency. I didn't mean the sense of urgency, the lack of sense of urgency in general. We are all in agreement regarding the examples that Carmen and András gave when it comes to the society, perceptions, attitudes, but also when it comes to the role of institutions. I meant specifically the lack of sense of urgency that a war, a non-kinetic war, has been waged against us since 24th of February. This is what I meant. There is no such sense, and I'm dealing with governmental members. And also I'm traveling a lot. So I see that there is no sense of urgency about the perception of our political stakeholders that there is a war being waged against all of us in Europe. This is what I meant. I think this is an important clarification. Now, coming to the strategic autonomy, as an expert, I would say that the concept of strategic autonomy died on February 24th. This is my absolute personal opinion, and the only way forward is to strengthen the European pillar within NATO, and that is coming from someone who is based in a non-NATO member. That tells you everything, right? But of course, I mean, it's very sexy to use all these different concepts, and I mean, I know European institutions, European Union institutions, so they will not give up on that. Of course, it will take time to say, to say goodbye to this, very pretentious and ambitious at the same time concept, which, by the way, emerged due to a lot of self-inflicted pain. And we heard of some examples, like the Hungarian colleague gave the example on energy dependence, which, by the way, is the very same case in Austria. Self-inflicted pain, self-inflicted dependencies, which every geopolitical analyst would point you to, that you should never, ever make yourself dependent on a sole supplier in any case. We saw it also during the pandemic with China. By the way, let me give you another example. The celebrated green transition and decarbonization. We have 90% dependence on China for the mineral, 90, not 19% dependence when it comes to the minerals and rare earths for our decarbonization. So we may switch, and yes, this time we are aware of it, but at the very same time, we are sliding into a new kind of dependence if we are to speed up the green transition, because we cannot diversify that quickly. So strategic autonomy, we are going to hear a lot about it, but in reality, it's going to be about reconfiguration of supply chains, creating new, values chains with like-minded countries. This is already happening in the Indo-Pacific and also on the old continent, but nobody is really strategically autonomous in an interconnected world. So what we are going to witness is my base scenario of a bifurcation of the global system, bifurcation which will unfortunately affect once again the Central and Eastern European countries in the worst matter. Bifurcation means that the global system with all these interconnected socioeconomic networks is splitting in two parts. Centered around two centers of power, namely United States and China. And at some point in time, yes, we Europeans wanted strategic autonomy because we didn't want to take sides. But at some point of time, I argue that we all, if this kind of rivalry is going to deepen, we are going to be confronted with either or choices. And once again, it's not going to be a strategic autonomy, but it's going to be siding with the one or with the other center of power. Unless we go a third way with other non-aligned like India, but this is all a future that nobody can foresee or, can tell about.
Yeah. Alena, what would you like to say about the way how strategic autonomy died?
Quick death. But strategic autonomy is this concept where everybody can actually make out of it whatever they want, because there's not much agreement on what it actually means. But if we're talking about its pure form as it was envisioned originally and philosophically, I think it's a concept for maybe not the reality that we have right now. And if it's ever possible, it will be in some very long run. And as one famous economist say it, in the long run, we're all dead if we only hope for strategic autonomy of Europe. So for Central Europeans, what they prefer to see, how they prefer to interpret some responsible autonomy or whatever the concepts are, is that first, and we mentioned it earlier, that without American buy-in, it's hardly possible to ensure the security of Europe. Second, yes, Europeans have to do more, regardless of what Americans is doing. It's our obligation and we own it for ourselves. And the third thing, Europeans have to do more also for the European neighborhood.
Thank you, Carmen. So new experience, you are the last.
Absolutely. Well, actually, I agree with everything that has been said. It's very important to have a strong European security pillar inside NATO. It's important that we continue to work closely together, that whatever the European Union does to reinforce security and defense, which is paramount, as you were saying, my colleagues were saying before me, does complement what NATO does and the other way around. So it's obvious that we need a stronger European Union within NATO, but it has to be basically the two organizations need to work together and have to complement each other. So that's also our point of view.
Yeah, thank you very much. As we are out of time, I will very shortly misuse again my role as a moderator. Very quick answer to the question: where Ukraine is after Ukraine wins in Central Europe. But please, very quick. And let's go by reverse order as well. András.
I didn't understand the question. I didn't understand your question.
Yeah, where Ukraine? How do you see Ukraine's role in Central Europe and Central European security? In a few words, maybe in one word. How do you see us? Well, I never ask easy questions.
Together.
András?
Together. A very close partner, a multifaceted partnership without membership in the short and medium run. Because membership is not realistic either in NATO nor in the EU in the short and medium run. But everything else, to quote Romano Prodi, former head of the European Commission, everything but the institutions. Literally everything.
Velina?
That's it.
Velina?
Ukraine's future is in Europe, and that means also in all relevant European and transatlantic institutions.
I see Ukraine as a trendsetter in terms of how to fight a war and how to introduce the whole of society approach to defense that we need to learn from.
So we see that everyone agrees that Ukraine will win, and we see absolutely no coherence in vision where Ukraine is. And I hope that would be a topic for the one of or many of next discussions. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, the audience, for participation. Many thanks, particularly for those participants online, because I can only imagine how hard is that not seeing us at all to take part in that discussion, and sorry for my jokes that are sometimes very very painful to András, but well, we had to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, well,